You know that moment when it hits you? Your husband thinks you're about as useful as a chocolate teapot? I discovered this charming little fact one Tuesday evening at Romano's Italian Bistro, right in front of his entire family. While mid-chew on what would soon be the most expensive piece of chicken parmesan in culinary history. Picture it? There I was, dressed in my best please like me outfit. The one that says I'm trying but not too hard. Sitting across from my husband George and his precious family, the Hendersons. Oh, the Hendersons. If passive aggression were an Olympic sport, they'd have more gold medals than Michael Phelps. George's mother, Patricia, or as I privately dubbed her, the Ice Queen of Suburbia, had been shooting me her signature look all evening. You know the one. Somewhere between, I smell something unpleasant, and, why did my son marry this? His sister Jennifer was there too, fresh off her latest promotion at Daddy's company because nepotism is such a lovely thing, unless it's not you benefiting. The conversation had been crawling along like molasses in January, until George's father, Big Jim Henderson, started talking about his newest business venture, something about acquiring a chain of hardware stores. I should have stayed quiet. I should have smiled and nodded like the good little wife I was supposed to be. But no, I had to open my mouth. Actually, I said, because apparently I enjoy self-inflicted punishment. Wouldn't it be smarter to diversify into online sales first? The hardware market is shifting, and that's when George did it. Right there, in front of God, the Hendersons, and probably half the restaurant. He threw down his napkin and said, "Lisa, honey, stick to what you know, okay? Business talk is way over your head." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with one of Big Jim's hardware store butter knives. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching George's family exchange those knowing looks. You know the ones. Oh dear, she's been put in her place. Expressions that made my blood pressure spike higher than a SpaceX rocket. But here's the thing about being married 7 years. You learn to read between the lines. And what George was really saying in front of his entire family was that I was incompetent, that my opinion didn't matter, that I should just sit pretty and let the real adults handle the thinking. Patricia actually smiled, not a warm, "Oh, how sweet" smile, but one that said, "Finally, someone put her in her place." Jennifer smirked into her wine glass like she was watching her favorite reality show. And Big Jim? He just grunted and went back to his steak, pretending nothing happened. The funny thing? I wasn't even wrong. I'd been watching the hardware industry for months, doing research for my own little side project that George knew nothing about. But apparently having a bachelor's degree in business and 6 years as a financial analyst meant nothing when it came to the Henderson family dynamics. I sat there feeling smaller than an ant at a picnic, watching my husband soak up his family's approval, because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? George getting his gold star from Mommy and Daddy for keeping his wife in line, for proving he was still their little boy, even if he'd married beneath their standards. The worst part? This wasn't the first time. George had been running this routine for months, ever since his promotion at work. Suddenly, he was the expert on everything. And I was just the little woman who made good coffee and remembered to record his ridiculous sports shows. But you know what they say about the straw that breaks the camel's back? Well, this wasn't just a straw. It was a whole haystack delivered with a side of family humiliation and garnished with complete disrespect. So there I sat, in my best dress, at a table full of people who thought I was about as sharp as a bowling ball, while my husband collected high fives for putting me in my place. And that's when it hit me. George had just handed me the perfect opportunity to show exactly what I was capable of. After all, they say the best revenge is living well. But sometimes the best revenge is making sure everyone knows exactly who's been paying the bills. The rest of dinner? Like watching a nature documentary on social hierarchy. Except I was the gazelle, and the Hendersons were the lions. And let me tell you, they were hungry. Jennifer decided to pile on because apparently one family member humiliating me wasn't enough entertainment for one evening. You know, "Lisa," she said, twirling her pasta like she was conducting an orchestra, Maybe you should focus on making that little blog of yours more successful before giving business advice. Ah, yes, my little blog. The one that had been earning more than George's car payment for the past 6 months. The one I'd kept quiet about so as not to bruise his ego. How foolish of me to think that financial success from my own hard work might be worth mentioning. It's not really a blog, I said, keeping my voice level. It's more of a hobby, George interrupted, not even glancing at me. Lisa's got this cute little website where she gives financial tips. It's sweet. Sweet like a pat on the head. Like telling a 5-year-old their finger painting is beautiful before sticking it on the fridge and forgetting about it. Patricia leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her wine glass. Oh, how nice. So important for wives to have their little interests. She said, interests. Like most people say, infectious diseases. Big Jim chuckled. Back in my day, women didn't need to worry about business. Their husbands handled all that complicated stuff. And there it was, the family motto. Henderson men know best, and Henderson women know their place. Too bad nobody had sent me the memo about where my place was supposed to be, because I'd been operating under the assumption it was wherever I pleased. George was eating this up like it was his birthday cake, glancing around the table to make sure everyone witnessed his masterful display of husbandly authority. It was like watching a peacock show off its feathers, except peacocks are actually impressive. Lisa's always been a bit of a dreamer, he said, reaching over to pat my hand in what he probably thought was an affectionate gesture. Remember when she wanted to go back to school for her MBA? Thank God we talked her out of that waste of money. We talked me out of it, indeed. What actually happened was George panicked at the thought of his wife being more educated than him, and his family backed him up faster than a NASCAR pit crew. But sure, let's call it a mutual decision. Jennifer laughed. Oh my God. Remember when she thought she could give investment advice? That was adorable. The thing is, I'd been giving investment advice successfully to about 15,000 subscribers, with an average return of 12% on their portfolios. But why let facts get in the way of a good family roast? Well, I said, trying again to maintain some dignity. Actually, the website has been quite successful. We've helped a lot of people with their... Sweetie, George interrupted. And I swear his voice had that same condescending tone you use when explaining to a toddler why they can't have ice cream for breakfast. Let's not bore everyone with the details. Bore them? The only boring part of this conversation was listening to George's family pat themselves on the back for being such brilliant business minds, while completely dismissing the woman who had been quietly building her own empire right under their noses. The waiter came by to refill our wine glasses, and I caught him giving me a sympathetic look. Even a complete stranger could see I was being treated like the family pet who'd had the audacity to join the adult conversation. Patricia raised her glass. To George's promotion and his bright future at the company, she paused, looking right at me, and to wives who support their husbands' dreams. Everyone clinked glasses, even George. Especially George, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't just married to George. I was married to the entire Henderson family dynamic, where women were decorative, men were in charge, and questioning the natural order was about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. I'd been playing by their rules for 7 years, fitting into their tiny box of acceptable wife behavior, smiling at their jokes, laughing when they dismissed my opinions, pretending George's protectiveness was love rather than insecurity dressed up in a fancy suit. But sitting there, watching my husband collect congratulations for successfully putting me in my place, I realized something beautiful. I'd been playing the wrong game entirely. You see, the Hendersons had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that because I'd been quiet, I was weak. Because I'd been respectful, I was submissive. Because I'd been supporting George's career, I didn't have one of my own. They had no idea that the little blog they'd been mocking had just landed a book deal. They didn't know that my cute website had attracted offers from 3 major financial firms for consulting contracts. They couldn't have imagined that while they were busy congratulating George on his promotion, I'd been quietly building something that would make his salary look like pocket change. But they were about to find out. The rest of the evening played out like a bad sitcom where everyone is in on the joke except the person it's about. Me, in case that wasn't clear. George's family continued their masterclass in condescension while I smiled and nodded like one of those dashboard bobblehead dogs. But inside my head, I was running calculations. Not just financial ones, though those were satisfying too, but strategic ones. You know what's funny about being underestimated? It's like being invisible with superpowers. People reveal the most when they think you're not smart enough to understand. When Big Jim bragged about his latest genius acquisition strategy, I realized he'd basically outlined a textbook case of over-leveraging. When Jennifer mentioned her brilliant investment portfolio, I did some quick math and figured she was about 6 months away from a spectacular financial faceplant. And when Patricia talked about their diversified retirement fund, I nearly choked on my tiramisu. Apparently, putting everything into tech stocks during a bubble counts as diversification in Henderson land. But I kept quiet. Here's the thing about being married to someone who thinks you're incompetent. They tell you everything. George had been coming home for months, venting about work, complaining about his family's financial decisions, sharing details of their business ventures, all while assuming I was just a good little wife who nodded along without understanding any of it. Poor George. He had no idea he'd been living with a financial analyst who had been taking notes. Then the waiter brought the check, and George reached for it with all the confidence of a man who'd just asserted his dominance over his supposedly incapable wife. But then he did something that made my night. He handed it to me. "Here you go, honey," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You can handle the tip calculation, right?" Just the simple math stuff, because apparently figuring out 20% of a restaurant bill was about the limit of my capabilities. I looked at the check. $93,647. Not bad for a family of 5 at a decent restaurant. George probably expected me to squint at the numbers, count on my fingers, maybe ask him to double-check my work. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Right there. In front of God and the Henderson family, I transferred the exact amount from my business account to my personal account, the same account that had quietly been accumulating money from my little blog for the past year. "There," I said, signing the receipt with a flourish. "All taken care of." George looked confused. "Wait, did you use the joint account?" "Nope," I said, slipping my phone back into my purse. "Personal account." "Don't worry about it." Here's where it gets interesting. George knew roughly how much money I made from my hobby. At least, he thought he did. He assumed I was pulling in a few hundred a month, enough for nice clothes or a spa day, but nothing significant. He had no idea that my hobby had been earning more than his day job for the past 6 months. He didn't know about the book deal, the consulting contracts, or that I'd been quietly amassing what most would call a small fortune. But he was about to find out. The car ride home was interesting. George was in full mansplain mode, explaining why I shouldn't have wasted my fun money on dinner when he could have paid for it, because apparently me paying for my own humiliation was financially irresponsible. "I just don't understand why you'd spend your little savings on dinner," he said, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "That's what our joint account is for." Our joint account. The account where George deposited his salary, and I was supposed to add my modest allowance from my little hobby. The one where I'd been the model wife, only withdrawing money for groceries and household needs, while George freely splurged on golf memberships and fancy lunches with his coworkers. "Don't worry about it," I said, staring out the window. "I can afford it." "Lisa, honey," he said gently, "I know you think your blog is doing well, but you need to be realistic about—" I cut him off. "What do you think I made last month?" He hesitated, uncomfortable with the direct question. "I don't know. A few hundred? Maybe 1,000 on a good month?" I smiled, actually smiled. "Try 15,000. The car swerved slightly as George processed what I'd just said. 15,000? He repeated, eyes wide. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. That's not possible," George finally said. "You're giving financial tips on a blog. Nobody makes that kind of money from what, George?" I said evenly. From being competent? From understanding business? From knowing what I'm talking about? We pulled into the driveway, and George sat there for a long moment, staring at the garage door like it held the secrets of the universe. "You're joking," he said weakly. "This is some kind of joke, right?" I got out of the car without answering, leaving him sitting there in stunned silence. Because here's the thing about being underestimated for 7 years. Eventually, you stop caring whether people believe you. You just start caring about making them pay attention. The next morning, George woke up in full detective mode. I could hear him downstairs, rummaging through papers, probably trying to figure out if his wife had secretly been living a double life as some financial mastermind. I made coffee, because even during a marital crisis, caffeine is essential, and waited for the inevitable interrogation. It came right on schedule, just as I was opening my laptop to check my morning analytics. "Lisa," George said, standing in the doorway like he was about to deliver devastating news, "I need to see your bank statements." I looked up from my computer, where my latest video on retirement planning was racking up views. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart." "This is serious," he said, that little vein in his forehead beginning to pulse. "If you're really making that kind of money, I need to know." "We're married. We share finances." Ah, yes, the "we share finances" speech. The same one I'd heard when I wanted to spend $50 on a professional development course. But that somehow never applied when George bought new golf clubs or work laptops. "Sure," I said, pulling up my banking app. "Which account would you like to see first? The business checking? The high-yield savings? Or the investment portfolio?" George's face went through several fascinating shades of disbelief. "Investment. Portfolio? Well, I couldn't just leave all that money sitting in a regular savings account earning 0.02% interest. That would be financially irresponsible," I said lightly, turning the laptop screen toward him. "See? Diversified index funds, some individual stocks, a few bonds. Nothing too wild." He stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief, to something that looked suspiciously like panic. "This says you have almost $200,000. "Well, it's been a good year," I said, sipping my coffee. "The book deal helped, and the consulting contracts. Oh, and the speaking engagements. Turns out people actually do value financial advice from someone who knows what they're talking about." George sank into the chair opposite me. "Book deal? Building Wealth in the Digital Age, A Practical Guide to Financial Independence. It should be in stores next spring." The advance was quite generous. Speaking engagements? Corporate events, mostly. Financial literacy workshops? Last month I spoke in Chicago. The week before that, Denver. This weekend I'm flying to Seattle. I paused. First class, of course. When you're the expert, they treat you like one. I watched as his worldview shattered in real time, like someone realizing they'd been playing checkers while their opponent had been playing chess all along. But you never said anything. You never told me about any of this." "George, honey," I said, echoing the condescending tone he'd used on me the night before. "I tried to tell you, remember? Every time I mentioned the website was doing well, you patted me on the head and called it cute. Every time I tried to talk about business," I finished for him, "you told me to stick to what I knew." "So I did." He ran his hands through his hair, looking like his world had just tilted sideways. "This is insane. You've been lying to me for months." "I haven't lied about anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped trying to impress people who were determined to be unimpressed." George's phone buzzed. He glanced at it automatically, then went pale. "What is it?" I asked, though I already had a pretty good idea. It's a Google alert. For your name." He looked up, stunned. "There's an article about you in Forbes. 30 under 30 in finance?" I'd actually forgotten about that. The photographer had been lovely. Professional, quick, flattering lighting. "Oh, right," I said lightly. "That came out today. I should probably post about it. It's good for the brand." George just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Who are you?" "I'm the same person I've always been, George. The same woman who tried to give you business advice last night. The same woman who wanted to go back to school for her MBA. The same woman who's been building a career while you've been building. What exactly? He didn't answer. Probably because we both knew the answer was nothing, unless you counted a shiny collection of golf trophies and a well-fed superiority complex. Look, I said, closing my laptop gently. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. But last night, when you humiliated me in front of your family, when you told me to stick to what I know, that hurt. Because I do know what I'm talking about. I always have. George's phone buzzed again. Then again, apparently the Forbes article was spreading fast. My mom's texting me, he muttered, staring at his screen. She wants to know if the Lisa Henderson in this article is my wife, I smiled. Well, what are you going to tell her? I don't know what to tell her. How about the truth? That your wife is actually quite good at business? That she's successful? That maybe, just maybe, she deserved a little respect instead of being treated like the family pet? George looked like he might be sick. Lisa, I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked. You never listened. You just assumed that because I was quiet, I was empty? Because I was supportive, I was stupid. Because I was your wife, I was your subordinate. My phone rang. My literary agent. Probably calling about the Forbes piece and what it might mean for book sales. I need to take this, I said, standing. It's about business. You know, that thing I'm apparently too incompetent to understand. As I walked toward my home office, I heard George's phone ring again, probably his mother, demanding to know how her son's silly little wife had ended up in one of the most prestigious business magazines in the world. I couldn't wait to hear that explanation. 3 months later, I sat in my new office. Yes, a real one this time. Working from home had become complicated. When my phone buzzed, George's name flashed across the screen. Lisa, we need to talk. I glanced at my calendar. Consultation call in 20 minutes. Podcast interview about women's financial independence right after. George's identity crisis would have to wait. I'm pretty busy today, I said, scrolling through my inbox. How about dinner? I'll pick the restaurant this time. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. About us. About everything. I leaned back in my chair. Since the Forbes article, George had been walking around like a man who'd just discovered his pet goldfish was actually a shark. His family had gone from treating me like the family embarrassment to acting like I was some kind of financial celebrity who'd been gracing their dinner table. Patricia had actually called to ask for investment advice. Jennifer had sent me a LinkedIn request. Big Jim had started ending his texts with respectfully yours, like I was a senator. It was hilarious, really. The same people who had dismissed me for years were now hanging on my every word about market trends and portfolio diversification. George, I said, spinning my chair to face the window, watching the city skyline glow in the afternoon light. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you apologizing because you realized you were wrong, or because you realized I was successful? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Both, he said finally. That's honest, at least. Lisa, I know I screwed up. I know I didn't, George said quietly. I didn't see you? Really? I asked. See me? He swallowed hard. And I'm sorry. You're sorry you got caught. No, he said. I'm sorry I was an idiot. I'm sorry I let my family treat you like that. I'm sorry I treated you like that. I thought back to that night at Romano's. George collecting high fives for putting me in my place, his family smiling like I was a trained seal finally learning her trick. George, I said softly, do you remember what you said when I wanted to go back to school? He nodded slowly. I said we couldn't afford it. You said it was a waste of money. But you could afford golf lessons. You could afford that expensive watch. You could afford a lot of things, just not my education. I was scared, he admitted. I was scared you'd become someone who didn't need me. And now, his voice cracked. Now I'm scared you'll realize you don't want me. I looked down at my engagement ring, still sitting on my finger after all these months. It was beautiful. George had good taste, I'd give him that. But lately it felt heavy, like it was weighing down my hand. The thing is, George, I said quietly. I don't need you. I haven't needed you for a long time. I stayed because I wanted to. Because I thought we were partners. Because I thought you respected me. I do respect you, he said quickly. I do. You respect my success, I replied. That's not the same thing. A knock at the door interrupted us. My assistant, reminding me my consultation call was about to start. Yes, I had an assistant now. Turns out when you're running a thriving business, you need one. I have to go, I said, glancing at the clock. But George, next time you want to talk business, try actually listening. I might surprise you. Lisa, wait. Oh, and George? I added, my voice steady. If you ever try to silence me in front of your family again, I won't just pay for dinner. I'll buy the entire restaurant and ban you from eating there. I hung up before he could answer. My assistant poked her head in. Ready for the Peterson consultation? 5 minutes, I said, straightening my blazer. Oh, and that reporter from the Wall Street Journal called. They want to schedule an interview about your book. Next week, I said with a smile, and make sure there's a photographer. I want to look professional. As I prepared for the call, I thought back to that dinner at Romano's, George's condescending smile, his hand patting mine while he explained how business worked, his family's smug laughter. They'd been so certain I was harmless. A pretty face, a polite voice, a woman who didn't understand important things. They'd been wrong about everything, except one thing. I did know my place. My place was at the head of the table, making the decisions, building the empire, showing everyone what competence really looks like, and the view from up here? Absolutely spectacular. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead. And sometimes the sweetest victory isn't when people apologize. It's when they realize they should have been apologizing all along. After all, there's nothing quite like the look on someone's face when they realize they've been playing checkers while you've been playing chess, especially when they're the ones who taught you the game was rigged from the start.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.